All right, so hopefully you learned about the Revolutionary War when you were watching the Story of Us video, and then you did the assignment with the Declaration of Independence, and you learned how it kind of changed the course of the war from being just about taxes to actually being about the United States wanting to separate from England and form their own country. And so we know that the Battle of Yorktown, the last battle of the war, is where General Cornwallis surrendered to George Washington, and that meant that the Americans won the Revolutionary War. And so they will meet with the British in Paris in 1783, and King George III will send representatives from England, and there will be representatives from the United States, and they will meet to sign the treaty, which will officially end the Revolutionary War. And the treaty will recognize the United States as a new and independent nation. So it will recognize that the U.S. is now separate from England and that they are their own country. So after the United States has earned their independence, they have to establish their own form of government. And their first attempt at this is known as the Articles of Confederation. It was the first official U.S. Constitution. And it was ratified by all 13 states in March of 1781, and it will be the Constitution in the United States until 1789. But the Articles of Confederation was really just a loose organization of the 13 states under a very weak central government. So the colonists, remember, didn't like the king. They thought he had too much authority. So it makes sense that once they become the United States, they want to make a government that's pretty weak. But the Articles of Confederation had a lot of problems because they made the government so weak. So here are some of the main weaknesses. There was no executive branch, so there's no president under the Articles of Confederation. There was no judicial branch, so there was no national court system. There was a legislative branch, so there is a Congress, but Congress had very limited powers. Congress had no power to tax. So remember, one of the reasons the revolution started is because of all of the taxes that the colonists were forced to pay. So it makes sense that they wouldn't want to pay taxes in their new country. But without paying taxes, you can't afford a lot of things like a military. So there was no national military under the Articles of Confederation. Each individual state still had their small state militias, but there was no United States Army or anything like that because there was no money to pay for it. Congress also had no power to enforce laws, so even though they could make laws, they couldn't enforce them. And it took a unanimous vote to amend the article. So anytime the states wanted to change the articles, all 13 states had to agree to change it. And this was an issue because the states didn't agree on a lot of things. And so it became really hard in order for them to, one, all meet at a time and then to agree on how they actually wanted to change the articles. And so for a while, the articles stay as the Constitution, but then an event known as Shays' Rebellion in 1786 into early 1787 will show the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation and that a new Constitution will be needed. So this rebellion happened in Massachusetts, and it was led by a man named Daniel Shays, who was a farmer and a Revolutionary War veteran, and he will lead a bunch of other farmers who were also war veterans against the governor of Massachusetts. So what happened is these men had left their farms and they had went off to fight in the Continental Army and fight against the British. Well, while they were gone, no one was tending to their farms, and so they weren't making any money off of their crops or anything like that. And when they come home, it takes them a while to, clean up their fields and get everything back together. Well, in the meantime, they were behind on their taxes because they hadn't been making any money, and the governor was going to foreclose on their property. And these farmers get together and they were like, no, you're not going to do that to us. We sacrificed, we went to fight the British so that we could have freedom, and you're not going to take our property. And so they kind of just take over the whole government in Massachusetts, and the governor calls up the federal government and is like, hey, I need you to send the army down here and help me control these farmers. And the federal government's like, what army? So I just told you one of the weaknesses of the articles is there was no army. And so this event shows that the Articles of Confederation were too weak and that they were going to need a stronger federal government to deal with the new problems that were occurring in the new country. And so what happens is this leads to the meeting of the Constitutional Convention, which met in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1787, and they will write a new constitution. So this will be men like Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, men who we consider to be the founding fathers, will meet at Independence Hall right here, which is also where the Declaration of Independence was signed, and they will create a new constitution that will have a stronger government that will be able to handle some of the problems that will arise in the newly formed United States of America. So what you guys will be doing today is you're going to read some information about Shays' Rebellion. This is a textbook excerpt which goes into a little bit more detail about what the rebellion was and what was going on and things like that. And then you've got 5 questions that you're going to answer about Shays' Rebellion. And look at number 5. It's one question you have about the reading. Make sure you give me a question. It doesn't have to be something you're confused on. It can just be something that maybe you're interested in learning more about or something that caught your attention like that. But give me a question for number 5.